Awesome. Welcome. Today we're here to talk about assessments and the hiring process, and we have two awesome guests joining us. My name is Jill New, and I'm the Career Programs and Outreach Manager for Student Veterans. And we're going to go ahead and let our guests introduce themselves and talk about how they got started with assessments, and we'll let them start from there. Lindsay, if you want to start.
Sure. So my name is Lindsay Flutie. I am the Global Talent and OD Manager at Kohu Inc. We are a leading semiconductor organization, global organization. My experience with assessments is quite broad. I got my doctorate in IO psychology, so I have a lot of background in all kinds of assessments, creating assessments, testing the validity and reliability of the assessments, whether it's personality, cognitive, or kind of behavioral-based interviewing techniques as well. And I have some volunteering experience with a company called the Honor Foundation. They are a nonprofit organization that helps retiring Navy SEALs and special ops kind of transition into their kind of second life.
Awesome.
Hi. Oh, I popped up. Hi there, my name is Lauren Faulkner. I am from General Dynamics, specifically the General Dynamics Mission Systems Company, where we are focused on command control systems for all domains across the military. Larger General Dynamics organization, I was responsible for the internship program at General Dynamics, as well as our college recruiting process. And prior to that, I was in recruiting and used assessments broadly in the interviewing process. And today at General Dynamics, I do a lot of behavioral style debriefs of assessments, 360 assessments and the like. So I'm happy to talk to you about it today.
Thanks so much. So you talked a little bit about what assessments are, but if, some of us aren't all IO psychology people. If you want to tell me more in an academic way, what's an assessment?
Some people would call it a test. It's not necessarily always a test. So, an assessment is a measurement to identify some skill set criteria that you identify, whether it's personality styles like Myers-Briggs or DISC, whether it is identifying leadership competencies, as Lauren said, kind of in a 360 assessment. But it's just a measurement, individual measurement to identify where we are doing well and where we might have some opportunities, or it could just be identifying where our strengths are.
Great. So for our veterans, maybe they have not necessarily taken an assessment in the recent past. Maybe the last time they took one was when they were in high school. And I remember the first time I took one, I think I might have even been in middle school when it was the basic Myers-Briggs, where they're trying to teach you what, to think about what are your strengths and your weaknesses. And I know from experience and from coaching that strengths and weaknesses tend to be a question that gets asked in the hiring process. So as a job seeker, where do you think the use of an assessment might benefit you?
Absolutely. So when you're fronted with an assessment, it actually brings the opportunity of identifying how to answer that question of what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses. And actually, there are assessments that you can take regardless of a potential employer prompting you to take an assessment. You can find something one which is called Strengths Finder, and you can use that to identify, hey, what are my potential strengths? How do I translate my experience into a career, into the working world? And you can find various types of assessments online available to you to help you find lingo that translates into the career and working world that you can actually use to describe what your strengths truly are. You know, a lot of people used canned answers of, oh, I'm a team player and I have great customer service skills. Okay, what's the next level from that? And what do you really truly identify with? And what you'll find is that assessments can give you that lingo, that yeah, okay, those are some words that I do identify with, and I can add that to my repertoire of saying how to describe myself, rather than just giving I have great customer service skills and I'm a team player type answer when you're fronted with that interview question. You can find assessments will give you a bit more detail of how to really describe yourself and what your strengths are.
Mm-hmm. Yep. There are also, I wouldn't necessarily call it a true measurement. Well, I guess it could be. But behavioral based interviewing is, I would say, an assessment of someone's competencies in any given area. And that definitely gives you kind of a real time assessment of asking someone, tell me about a time where you had a really challenging customer. What was that situation and what did you do as a result to kind of rectify that? So it gives the interviewer or hiring managers a real-time view of how this person can problem solve, what that conversation was like, to identify a multitude of competencies that they might be looking for to be a good fit for their organization. So a lot of times organizations, the organization I work for now, I know General Dynamics does as well. They will use these behavioral-based interview questions based on their leadership competency model and probably a multitude of other factors as well, to kind of make sure they have a really good fit and the person has the competencies necessary to perform the job.
That's true. My most creative behavioral interview question was, what kitchen tool would you be and why? Out of the kitchen drawer, what were you going to pick? So preparing for that was I didn't prepare, because I was not prepared for that one. I tried to think of something multi-use, but it failed miserably. So I will always remember the kitchen tool behavioral question in the interview process. The next thing I would ask was, why you just mentioned a little bit about it. So it's the leadership qualities and skills, but why would an employer use an assessment in the hiring process? Would they use more what you talked about, just behavioral types of questions, or do you think maybe employers are also going to potentially do these kind of formal assessments, or maybe some kind of other different type than these behavioral types of things?
From my experience, this is my fourth or fifth manufacturing environment, large organization, legal tends to kind of prevent us from using certain assessments, whether it's just based on validity and reliability of the assessment or just kind of the risk factor of using those things. So I would say, from my experience, a bulk of those organizations were more likely to use behavioral-based interview questions. They can kind of tailor those as well to their own particular organization. But the organization I work for, I've also worked for others. They have used kind of interviewing, or not interviewing, but pre-employment assessments, kind of like Profile XT, the DISC, Myers-Briggs, a personality inventory, and they don't necessarily use those to make a decision, but it will give them insight into whether or not that person would be a good fit on the team, if that makes sense.
That makes sense. And then also, interviews are always two-way. You as a job seeker are looking to see if they're a good fit for you. So if some of these assessment types of questions are throwing you off, or maybe the interview is very heavy in this, and maybe that type of environment is making you feel uncomfortable, then maybe it's not a good fit for you. And I think
Right.
that's important for job seekers to know that it's a two-way street. So everybody gets really nervous in an interview, and it feels like, because it's a job and about your livelihood, there's a lot on the line. But ultimately, and I tend to tell clients this all the time, is you're going to do better in an environment that you're happy in, that you fit in the culture. So these are important things to keep in mind as well. Lauren, do you have some other insight about assessments in the hiring process? And not in the hiring process, but why an employer would use an assessment in that process?
Yeah, sure. So, um, like Lindsay, General Dynamics does not use assessments in the hiring process specifically, but I have worked for previous employers that did use assessments in the hiring process. And what I will say is that it does have to be consistent. So, if one person gets the assessment, that is a candidate for the position. Everyone that is a candidate for that position needs to get that assessment, or it needs to be consistent for everyone that gets to a certain stage in the interview process. So it shouldn't be used as anything that, hey, rules you out or rules you in. It's just a tool to help assist that process, but it should never be the deciding factor on getting a job or not getting a job, which might also be why Lindsay's company and myself, our companies steer away from them in the hiring process specifically. However, aside from the hiring process, we use it very heavily in the in
Right.
development, career development, employee development, and honestly, I'm using this term a cultural development, where we're doing a lot of behavioral assessment to create a culture across the workplace, and specifically, we are using the DISC assessment um, that identifies what are your behaviors that you revert to in the workplace, what are your preferred behaviors, and what behaviors do others see in you. And we do this whole self-awareness bit, and it's really helped our company culture to say, hey, what type of behaviors do you revert to? And someone can actually identify what their behaviors are and have that self-awareness, and you're much more likely to be able to work better with your colleagues, with teams, when everyone is more aware of their behaviors. So that's how we use it, not just in the interview process, but also as a career development and employee development tool as well. And it's been a great tool to use. And culturally, a lot of the employees enjoy talking about it and learning about themselves and learning about others because of it.
I've actually worked places that we put our color on our name tag outside of our office, and then even in our signature line. So then you knew that I was a little type A. So if you were going to be interacting with me, I might be asking for a lot of details, so you weren't surprised when you walked in my office. So that was definitely really helpful in team development, especially when we were going through some leadership changes in places I've worked before. So it put everybody at the same spot. Everybody knew where we all were at the same time. I would also add that I have seen employers do skills assessments. So that's everything from typing tests.
Yep.
I know a tech company that has a big name came to where I've worked before and did a tech skills assessment. So they did a practice round for students to be able to practice those tech skills, so they had experience in what those would be like when they were interviewing. So if you're in a tech field, those might come up. And then I've also been in interview processes where the assessment included creating a presentation or outlining a project that I would implement if I got the job. But then again, back to what Lauren said, it wasn't the first thing. It wasn't the big deciding factor. It was third round of an interview,
Right.
just to get kind of an idea. And I feel like it was always, like you said, a cultural fit thing. So if you were coming with something that maybe was really, really far out there, that maybe you weren't going to be a great cultural fit because maybe you didn't do enough research on who you were interviewing with. So if you get asked for those types of things, it's a great opportunity to do that research on the organization you're going to be interviewing with and see what kind of projects are they already working on. So then you can either align similar to that or make something that's really complementary. So when you're doing that type of assessment. And then let's see, my next question is, so we just talked about that, and I talked a little bit about preparation. So what other types of preparation and expectations would a job seeker have in terms of assessments?
So my quick answer is when you are taking assessment, If it is a type of assessment that you are answering a series of questions and it's getting your, response based on the questions, and you're kind of like, okay, well, my response could be this way, it could be that way. Be your true, authentic self. When you are taking an assessment, don't try to assume what the assessment is asking from you. Don't try to assume that, hey, this assessment wants me to show up in this way, and then therefore change your answer slightly, or change something slightly because that's what you think they want you to answer. A lot of assessments are so smart, especially the ones that are question based. I'll speak to just a moment about the ones that are more presentation or problem solving based, but the ones that are based on questions. Hey, you're in this scenario. What would you do in this scenario? Don't think too much about it. Go with what you would initially think to respond, what your initial behavior would be in that scenario, and then go with that as your answer. The more you sit and try to think about it and line it up to exactly what you think they're looking for and what this job really wants, what's really interesting about these assessments is that they can sniff that out. They will sniff that out, and the assessment, it'll come back to the if the company is doing the assessment, it'll come back to them and say, hey, Jim, we detected some inconsistencies in Jim's responses here. He might be trying to create a persona that isn't totally authentic. So really, really interesting when you are taking some of those assessments to not necessarily don't over prepare for them. Be your true authentic self, but be honest and don't think too much about them. Now, it is a bit different when it comes to problem solving. Say, General Dynamics, you're interviewing for some of our software positions. Sure, you can do some preparation of problem solving scenarios and type questions that we might ask you to show us your competency from a skill set, say for it's a software engineering position, for example. But when it comes to behavioral or personality type assessments, don't think twice about them. Just roll with what your answer would be in your typical life.
Mm-hmm.
I would also make sure you remember when you're doing those problem solving ones, follow the STAR method. Number one, follow the STAR method: situation, task, action, result. That will really make sure that you stay on task and get all the information out when you're answering these types of problem solving questions in the interview process.
When it comes to assessments that are kind of those problem solving or cognitive assessments, I would just make sure that if you are a person like myself that has a learning disability, I recall taking one of these timed assessments and just failed miserably because there was not enough time. So, my disability, I was actually granted unlimited time on my SATs because that's what I require. So after I personally failed it the first time, I told them I had a disability, a learning disability, and they said, oh, well, you should have told us, we would have given you more time. So keep that in mind, because a lot of those kind of timed cognitive tests, they will kind of give you the blessing of a few extra minutes if needed.
We actually just had some conversations about accommodations and requests, so that was well timed, and it's good. It's good to hear it from somebody who's not just me. So I'm really ready to open it up for questions. If we have any questions from some of our viewers, and if we don't, then I feel like we have a lot of good information. So I'll go ahead and say thank you for your time, and we'll see what's going on in terms of questions. And it's just the one, and I think, Lindsay, you addressed it, how can an organization go about implementing assessments in the hiring process? So.
Yeah, I think, just to kind of give more context to that, depending on your role in the organization, whether it's HR or not, you always want to make sure you have that HR leadership buy-in, champion, and support before you even make any moves. But I would say larger organizations, like I know when I was at General Dynamics, first call I would make would be to legal to say, hey, this is something that I'm thinking about doing. What are your thoughts? Because they may have they may be totally okay with the situation of using some of those assessments, provided, kind of to Lauren's point, it's either, purely developmental or it's not a factor whatsoever in that decision of hiring. But it just gives you more context as to who that person is. So I'd make sure that you have the okay from legal, and then do your research. What do you want to measure? What do you want to know about these applicants? Is it a fit? Is it, cognitive? Is there a technical skill that you need to make sure that they have competence in? So do your research. And again, to Lauren's point, be consistent. So if everyone is getting a personality exam, everyone needs to get the personality exam, to make sure that you are not discriminating, or, that could just, again, legal reasons that could come back on you if you're not consistent about how you employ those.
Yes, and if you've ever taken a human resources class, then that's one of the things that gets really really hammered home. I remember that in some HR training, is that the purpose is really what's the purpose? So if the purpose is just because, then the answer is going to always be no.
Mm-hmm.
There's another question, and it says, in a former role, I liked that the organizational development leader would host sessions with department heads and their teams to do assessments as a group. How can managers use those tools to better understand team dynamics and to select the right person when adding to the team?
Yeah, so I think when it comes to those, and I've used intact team assessments and workshops for the last 10, 15 years. And I think that's a really great way to give you as an OD manager leader within the organization some really great insight. For example, when I was at General Dynamics NASCO, we used the DISC assessment, and it's a communication style assessment that identifies what your preferences are and how you communicate, and kind of to Lauren's point, the perceptions others may have of you. So it's great to do that as a team, as an intact team, because you get some really good insight into how your coworkers may be responding, maybe giving you some, triggers depending on how they're responding to your emails or verbally. So as I would be facilitating those conversations, it gives me some really good insight as to if you have one person who is very reserved and introverted, and are not necessarily as vocal, but everyone else on that team is more of that extroverted, kind of very vocal, extroverted, talking, thinking person. There could be some challenges for that introverted person and for those extroverts to make sure that that one person is being heard. So that gives me some really good insight into perhaps some root cause as to where there might be conflict on that team. And it kind of just gives you a really good view of, what makes that team special, where their strengths are as a team, as well as where they may have some gaps. So you could potentially use that information, their strengths and their gaps, to identify someone who might fill in that gap. However, that is a very risky decision. Again, there are some legal ramifications in, again, selecting someone based solely on an assessment to a particular team. But what it does give you is insight as to, okay, so we have someone here who might be an introvert or might be an extrovert, or is very conscientious and detail oriented, which is exactly what we need on this team. This could be a really great fit, but it should not be the end all be all decisive instrument used to make that decision.
And I'll add on to what Lindsay is saying. I actually do the DISC team assessments, and what we do is we look at role factors. So the question there was, how can a manager use these tools to better manage their teams? And it's not so much for the interviewing, but when you're managing a team, is what roles do I have on that team? Who is an innovator? Who is a specialist? Who is an analyzer? Who is a networker? And, when you talk about having a strong team, you often get the words, a diverse team is a strong team. And that is true, right? So you have team dynamics of, okay, is the team very outgoing and extroverted? Sure. But when you talk about the role factors of a very successful team, the role factors are also very diverse, and the role factors all need to be covered in different facets. Granted, we're depending on what the team's looking to accomplish, but you have these specific role factors that balance with behaviors. And when you can identify those on a team and you can do a debrief as a manager with your team, and you understand what role everyone plays on that team and they feel comfortable with that role, you know who to go to, you know who your networker is, you know who's going to analyze, you know who's going to be an innovator and come up with new ideas, you know who's going to be a specialist and have that key information that is always ready to go. And that really helps make your team strong. And that all is based off of assessments on the front end and understanding their behaviors and communication styles.
Mm-hmm.
I just was thinking about class projects and who those people are in a class project. Because when the first time you ever were in a class project, your teacher probably outlined who are those types of roles, and then you were supposed to pick, but maybe as a 12-year-old, you didn't have the skill set to be able to do that. So it's good to know that those are still happening, even in the workplace. So if you get a little schoolyard flashback about the roles, then that's why, because that's exactly what just happened with me. Another question is, if assessments are wanting us to be authentic and answer the question in a natural, answer the question in a way that's a natural response, would attempting to answer the assessment question in the STAR method flag the system in the way that this candidate is putting on a persona and not to be authentic in their response? That's a lot. Yes, go ahead.
I would just say I've only seen the STAR methodology used for behavioral based interview questions. So if someone is asking you, tell me about a time where you had a challenging customer, what was that situation? What did you do? If you, before you go into those kind of conversations, you can kind of prep yourself mentally in that STAR format of how you would respond. So the situation was, I had a customer who was really hostile. We were delivering his aircraft and he was screaming at us because we were late. That's the situation. The task I took was, I make sure to pull him aside from my team because we don't want people screaming in front of my team. That's inappropriate, right? And had the conversation and just said, I'd really want to meet your needs, but I'm going to need you to calm down a little bit. I'm going to need you to let's think about this. Let's talk about this. Aside, the action I took was I made sure to, kind of, if you can comp, I comped them some things, and just made sure that he realized why we were late. We were late because he delivered the aircraft to us late. So the entire schedule was now shifted. So really making that communication very clear at the end was the end result. So, moving forward, we've never had any issues with this customer. We deliver on time and he delivers on time as well. So I think it's just how you set up your situation and how you kind of give your answer. I don't think there's any way to kind of flag you as not being your true self. But as an interviewer, I can tell when people are doing the STAR format, and it makes it really easy for me to say, okay, that was the situation. That's what they did. That was the result. Okay, perfect. Like, it's a really good way to give your answers when you are interviewing.
I would think also that there's a difference between answering the behavioral type question and then an assessment. So there's behavioral questions that do assess your skill set, but then there's the more formalized assessment.
Correct.
And then it's the trying to game the system part of the actual assessment that may be the flag, but they don't necessarily mix together. One other thing I do want to mention is, if you are considering additional studies, you're a career pivoter, you're a recently transitioning service member, and you're not sure, you have no idea. You're like, well, I did this while I was in the service, but I kind of like it, but I don't know if I would really want to do this another 10, 15 years. Assessments can help you with that career exploration. So I always suggest to student veterans to reach out to their university career services offices, because a lot of times those are available and free. There's also some free ones through LinkedIn and LinkedIn Learning. And you can always Google some, and there's some basic ones. Workforce investment boards in your local area, which are usually county-based or regionally based, they'll also have some free assessments for you to be able to do. They're a tool. So it's not it's not the end all be all. So if you took the test and it said, well, you're a great food service worker, and you're thinking, well, I don't want to be a food service worker. It's not telling you that that's the job you have to have, but maybe you're looking at the skills that would have kicked out to you for you to be able to focus on what's a job that also uses those skills. And there's all kinds of information out there for free. You can connect with me to ask, get some advice about those types of career exploration assessments. And we can, connect and make sure that you're getting something that works well for you. But I definitely want to mention the career exploration aspect of assessments as well. But I think that's it. I appreciate everyone's time, and your expertise in this area. I learned some new things today, so that's great. And if that's it, I appreciate your time, and we'll connect some more for some additional opportunities for veterans in the workforce.
Sounds great. Thank you for the invite.
Yes, thank you so much for having